A lot of people think that only those who scream, cry excessively, or lose control have something wrong with their mind. But the truth is, almost everyone carries some kind of hidden sadness, a pain that doesn't show on the outside, but slowly eats away at them deep inside. That too is a form of suffering. According to Jung, this kind of pain comes from within, often when someone tries to be someone they're not, just to please others or fit in. We grow up being told what's right, how we should behave, what to wear, what to think. And in order to be accepted, many people start hiding their true feelings and desires. Everything might look fine on the outside, but inside, the person begins to feel tired, sad, irritated, without even knowing why. This way of living, without listening to what we truly feel, is what we call neurosis. It's not a breakdown, it's not madness, it's the body and mind signaling that something is disconnected from who we really are. It's just a sign that the person needs to reconnect with themselves and return to who they truly are. At school, at home, online. There's always someone telling you what's right or wrong, what you should do, how you should think. We grow up afraid of being different because no one wants to be left out or judged. So, many times, people start pretending. They act like they're happy, fake agreement, force a smile while saying everything's okay. But living behind a mask wears out the soul and drains what's inside. When we can't be authentic, the body and mind begin to show signs of exhaustion. You start wanting to disappear, to cry for no reason, to hide from the world. And all of that starts building up until it turns into a pain you can't quite explain. That pain isn't weakness, it's neurosis showing itself, asking for attention. It comes from living a life that doesn't match your inner world, from feelings you can't seem to express. Neurosis can come from anything that causes emotional pain, even if, to others, it seems like nothing. Some people suffer because of a fight with a family member, losing a job, or dealing with serious health issues. But others might suffer from something that seems small, like ordering a shirt online and receiving the wrong color. It might seem like an overreaction to someone else, but for the person feeling it, it carries real weight. Sometimes that small thing is just the last drop in a glass that's been full for a long time. And that's where many people get it wrong. They think neurosis only shows up during major life crises or when everything is falling apart. But that's not how it works. Neurosis can show up in subtle ways in everyday life. A constant sense of discomfort, sadness that appears out of nowhere, the urge to cry over something simple. The issue isn't the shirt or the wrong color. It's what that represents, maybe a feeling that nothing ever works out, that no one listens to you, or that even the small things seem to go wrong. When those emotions pile up, the body and mind begin to cry out for help. Each person experiences the world differently. What's light for one may be heavy for another. And that's why no pain should ever be dismissed as just being dramatic. Every form of suffering deserves to be heard. When we understand this, we start taking better care of our own feelings, and we also begin to respect the feelings of others more deeply. According to Jung, neurosis tends to appear when three things happen at once. First, an important issue comes up in a person's life. It might be a difficult decision, a frightening change, or an old wound resurfacing. Second, the person tries to avoid dealing with it. They might feel fear, insecurity, or just lack the energy to face it. And then comes the third point. Instead of resolving it, they push it deep into their mind, like sweeping dust under the rug. But what gets pushed down doesn't disappear. It stays there, hidden, waiting for a way out. And when it doesn't come out through words or the courage to face it, it starts showing up in other places, in the body, in emotions, in thoughts. The person might feel anxious, angry, drained, and not even know why. It's like carrying an invisible weight all the time. That's the silent path of neurosis, a subtle warning that it's time to look within with more honesty. Nobody likes to feel pain, so it's natural to avoid what hurt. But when we keep running from what we feel, the problem grows inside, in the mind and in the heart. And the more time passes, the harder it becomes to understand what's going on. That's why taking a look inward and trying to understand what we've been avoiding is such an important step toward feeling better. That step, even though it's difficult, can be the beginning of a deep and meaningful transformation. When something deeply bothers us, the body and mind develop ways to protect themselves. These are called defense mechanisms. It's like the brain is saying, "This hurts too much, let's hide it." So the person starts doing everything they can to avoid thinking about what's causing the pain. They might overwork themselves, overeat, binge-watch endless content, sleep all the time, or even rely on medication or alcohol to forget. It might seem helpful at first, but the pain always returns, sometimes even stronger. These defenses are like poorly placed bandages. They cover the wound, but they don't heal it. And worse, over time, they become a habit. The person gets used to running from what they feel. But deep inside, the problem keeps growing. Sadness becomes a constant weight. Anxiety spreads throughout the body. Anger shows up at the wrong times. All of this is the price of avoiding the emotional pain that needs to be faced. It's important to understand that using these escapes isn't a sign of weakness. Everyone does it from time to time. But if we truly want to feel better, we need to pause, take a deep breath, and start listening to what our heart and mind are trying to say. Because only then does the pain have a real chance to leave. More than that, if listened to carefully, the pain might actually point the way to a more authentic life. Many of the feelings we carry today come from way back in our childhood. When we're little, we learn from the adults around us how to deal with the world, with emotions, and with problems. If our parents or caregivers are anxious, fearful, or constantly hiding their feelings, we grow up believing that expressing emotions is dangerous. If they're always arguing or using fear to control, the child learns that the world is a scary place. And all of that gets stored deep inside, even after we grow up. From Jung's perspective, neurotic parents, meaning parents who also carry unresolved emotional wounds, end up unintentionally passing that on to their children. And it's not always out of malice. Often, it's simply the only way they know how to live. But children feel everything. And many times, they have no one to talk to about what they're feeling. So they keep it in. They learn to hide, to smile even when they're sad, to pretend everything is okay. And that habit sticks, even into adulthood. That's why so many adults still react like scared children when life gets difficult. Understanding this helps us have more compassion for ourselves, because many of the pains we feel today aren't our fault. They're old patterns we need to let go of. When we look at our past with kindness, we start to heal the wounds that were never properly cared for. There are many people who grow up physically, but remain emotionally tied to their parents. This means that even as adults, they continue to seek approval, avoid disappointing their family, or feel guilty when they make choices their parents might not agree with. It's like they're still that little child, trying to please in order to feel loved. This invisible bond can cause a lot of pain. The person can't fully choose their own life, because they feel like they're always indebted to their family. Jung warned that this lack of separation is one of the roads that lead to neurosis. Because adults need the freedom to be who they are, to make their own decisions, and to learn from their own mistakes. When that doesn't happen, the person becomes divided. On one side, what they truly want. On the other, what they feel they should do to avoid disappointing others. That internal conflict creates confusion, anxiety, and sadness, clear signs that something isn't right. And more importantly, it's a sign that something inside the person's awareness needs to evolve. Of course, loving your parents is important, but love is not the same as being emotionally trapped. True maturity begins when we can look at our parents with gratitude, but still follow our own path. When this separation happens in a healthy way, life begins to flow with more lightness and authenticity. Today, it's incredibly easy to get distracted and stop thinking about our own lives. Social media, video games, addictions, everything is designed to keep our attention constantly occupied. Food is fast, answers are instant, and even our desires seem to come from outside of us. We start following the crowd without ever stopping to ask, is this really what I want? Little by little, people lose the courage to make their own choices. It's as if everyone is being pushed along by an invisible current. For Jung, this passivity is dangerous. When someone stops living with awareness, they begin to feel empty. Not because something is missing out there, but because they're no longer present in their own life. On top of that, other things make the situation worse. Governments that treat people like children, companies that sell comfort in exchange for freedom, and even unhealthy habits like poor nutrition and irregular sleep, which weaken the mind. Over time, this way of living drains your inner strength. The person starts doubting themselves, loses the will to try, and constantly feels tired. And neurosis grows in that space. Where there's no choice, there's no real life. Regaining your sense of autonomy is often the first step out of this invisible prison. And that step, as hard as it might seem, is also the beginning of inner freedom. Jung also explained that there are two main types of neurosis. The first comes from the outside, problems with work, friends, family, or money. The person tries to fit into the world but struggles. They feel rejected, lost, unable to live the way others seem to live. This is the neurosis of failed adaptation to the external world. To improve, they need to learn how to relate, how to express themselves, and how to face daily challenges with more strength and clarity. But there is also a neurosis that comes from within. Sometimes, a person may seem fine on the outside. They have a job, friends, a stable routine, but inside, they carry a void that's hard to name. Nothing seems to make sense. Even when everything goes well, they still feel incomplete. This is the neurosis of disconnection from one's own soul, from one's inner truth. It shows up when the inner life has been neglected, when the deepest dreams and desires have been left behind. Each person needs to understand which of these pains they carry more strongly. In some cases, it's about learning to live in the world. In others, it's about learning to live with oneself. But most of the time, the two are intertwined. That's why the path to healing requires looking carefully both outward and inward. Neurosis, in these cases, isn't failure. It's a call for integration. Not everyone is able to adapt to the world as it is. For some people, social interactions are difficult. They don't know how to talk to others, how to assert themselves, how to be respected. They get nervous in groups, are afraid to speak their mind, and constantly feel out of place. Over time, they withdraw from people and begin to isolate themselves. This difficulty in participating in everyday life is one of the causes of neurosis. According to Jung, in these cases, the suffering comes from a lack of adaptation to social life. This person isn't wrong. They simply need to learn some basic skills that maybe no one ever taught them. Things like saying no, listening without fear, dealing with criticism, accepting that you won't always please everyone. These are parts of adult life. But those who don't develop these abilities end up walking on eggshells, always afraid of making a mistake, always trying to hide. Life begins to lose its color, and the feeling of exclusion grows quietly inside. The treatment for this kind of neurosis isn't to run away even more, but rather, little by little, to learn how to deal with the real world. And that starts with simple things: asking for help, trying again, accepting that it's okay to fail and still keep going. When a person starts feeling stronger in the small, everyday situations, they begin to regain the value they had lost. And with that, the neurosis starts to lose its grip. What once was suffering begins to transform into growth. Then there are those who seem to have adapted perfectly. They work, study, have a family, pay their bills, follow all the rules. On the outside, everything looks fine. But inside, there's a constant, unnamed exhaustion. They did everything by the book, and yet they're still sad, tired, unmotivated. Jung called this the neurosis of the very normal, the suffering of those who fit in so well that they ended up losing themselves in the process. These people often don't even know what they truly like. They just did what was expected, the degree their parents wanted, the job that provided security, the relationship that seemed right. But deep inside, there's a forgotten part that never had a chance to live. That part is the true individuality, the deep self that remained silent for years. And when that part starts knocking on the door, it shows up as anxiety, dissatisfaction, and a sadness no one can quite explain. This type of neurosis is harder to recognize because the person has nothing to complain about. But feeling disconnected from oneself is also real pain. And often, it's the hardest one of all, because there's no clear reason behind it. That's why it's so important to listen to what the heart is saying, even when life seems to be on track. In the end, what truly saves us isn't following every rule, it's making space to be who we really are. And that space, when respected, brings back the sense of meaning that was lost. There's a very common pain that's hard to put into words, the pain of being afraid to be different. Many people feel this inner calling, like something inside is saying, "This life isn't yours. You were born for something else." But at the same time, they're terrified of standing out, of thinking differently, of disappointing others. This conflict becomes a silent form of suffering. The person shuts down, hides, follows the crowd. And little by little, they start to disappear. Jung believed that every human being carries a unique truth within. Something that belongs only to them. A way of living, of feeling, of creating. But that truth doesn't emerge in the middle of noise. It shows up when we listen to the heart carefully. The problem is, the society we live in doesn't value that. It wants everyone to look the same, think the same, want the same things. Anyone who tries to break out of that mold is seen as strange or wrong. And so, many people end up suffocating their true self. This repression of individuality leads to neurosis, because the soul cannot stand being ignored for too long. Eventually, it will demand to be heard, sometimes through sadness, sometimes through anxiety, sometimes through a deep, aching emptiness. In other words, not listening to your inner truth is also a form of suffering. And recognizing that is the beginning of healing. It takes courage to truly listen to yourself, and even more courage to allow yourself to be who you really are. To break free from this kind of suffering, it's often necessary to go through something Jung called a symbolic death. This has nothing to do with actual death. It means letting die what no longer serves you. Old ideas, harmful habits, relationships that keep you from growing, and the images you've built of yourself that don't reflect who you really are. It's like shedding a layer of skin. And like all deep transformations, it's scary. But it can also be incredibly freeing. This symbolic death hurts because it shakes up everything that once felt safe. You might lose friends, change your path, or feel lost for a while. But that emptiness is necessary for something new to be born. It's like cleaning a messy room. At first, it seems worse, but then, piece by piece, things begin to fall into place. By letting go of what no longer makes sense, something much greater can begin to grow. For Jung, this process was a true rebirth. Neurosis is often the soul's way of saying, "It's time to change." It's not the end, it's the beginning of a more authentic life. And that beginning requires us to release the past, with respect, with courage, and with love for the person we're becoming. Living with authenticity is frightening. Embracing who you really are can come with losses. You might disappoint someone, face criticism, or have to start over. But Jung warned that refusing to change is even more dangerous. When you live just to please others, when you hide your emotions, when you say yes to everything just to avoid conflict, something inside you starts to slowly die. And what looks like safety is, in truth, a beautifully decorated prison. Daring to be yourself is like stepping into unknown territory. You can't predict exactly what will happen, but only on that path can you find real peace. It's not easy. Change takes strength. But staying stuck, pretending to be someone you're not, hurts even more. The soul needs room to grow. And if you don't listen, it will start to scream. That scream is often called neurosis. Jung also believed that some people are born with a different kind of calling. They can't live by simply repeating what others do. They need to create, to transform, to carve new paths. But when they try to force themselves to fit in, they become unwell. Not because there's something wrong with them, but because they're trying to live a life that isn't theirs. That's why you must listen to what's inside of you. It might be hard at first, but living in truth is always lighter. And even if the path feels lonely sometimes, it leads to a place where you can finally breathe, whole, real, and living a life that finally feels like your own.